At 4:41 in the morning, a police officer put a young woman in handcuffs on the shoulder of Route 9 for driving a car he did not believe was hers. She did not raise her voice, not once. She only asked him one thing, over and over, in the same steady tone. "Sir, please, call Mercy General. There is a child on that highway who is going to die." 31 minutes later, that officer's radio told him the name of the child. It was his daughter. Let me start with the car, because the car is where this whole thing begins, and because if you do not understand the car, you will not understand the woman. It was a 2009 Mercedes-Benz, an E-Class sedan, silver once and something closer to weathered pewter by the year this story takes place. The clear coat had gone chalky across the roof and the hood, the way it does when a car spends 15 winters outdoors in Ohio. There was a hairline crack in the lower corner of the windshield that had been there so long it had stopped being a flaw and started being a feature. The driver's seat had a worn spot on the left bolster, shaped like the outside of a man's thigh. That man was Walter Carter. Walter worked 41 years as a machinist at the Ridgemont Tool and Die Plant on Foundry Street, and for 38 of those years he drove whatever ran: a Buick with a rebuilt transmission, a pickup with a bed you could see the road through, a station wagon he kept alive on junkyard parts and stubbornness. He was a man who could fix anything except the plant closing, which it did in 2011, 3 years after he bought that Mercedes used off a lot in Columbus for $11,000 cash he had saved in a coffee can over 6 years. He bought it because his wife, Adele, had never in her life ridden in a nice car. That is the whole reason. There is no other reason. She had never ridden in a nice car, and Walter thought a woman who had raised 3 children on a machinist's wages and taught Sunday school for 30 years ought to ride in one at least once before she got old. He drove her home from the dealership the long way, out past the reservoir, with the windows down and the radio on, and Adele put her hand out into the wind like a girl. She died 4 years later. Walter kept the car. And every Sunday morning, for the rest of his life, he drove that car to Bethel Chapel with his granddaughter in the passenger seat, and he told her the same thing so many times she could recite it before she was 12. "Naomi," he would say, "there are folks in this world who will look at this car, and then look at me, and do arithmetic in their heads, and the arithmetic will come out wrong. Let it. You do not owe anybody an explanation for a thing you came by honest." Naomi Carter was 31 years old when this story happens, and she still had that car, and she still had that sentence, and she was about to need both of them more than she had ever needed anything. Naomi Carter was a pediatric trauma surgeon at Mercy General Hospital in Ridgemont, Ohio. I want to sit on that for a second, because those words go by fast and they should not. Pediatric trauma surgery is the specialty where they bring you children who have been broken by the world, by cars, by ladders, by machinery, by falls, by the ordinary catastrophes that visit ordinary families on ordinary Tuesdays. It requires 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 5 to 7 years of general surgery residency, and then 2 more years of fellowship on top of that. It is, by most counts, 13 to 15 years of training after high school. There were, in the year of this story, fewer than 900 board-certified pediatric surgeons in the entire United States. In the 60-mile radius around Ridgemont, Ohio, there was exactly one on call that night. Naomi got there the hard way, which in her case meant a mother named Yolanda who taught 4th grade for 29 years at Ridgemont Elementary and graded papers at the kitchen table until 11 o'clock at night, and a grandfather named Walter who drove her to every science fair, every state exam, every college interview, in that silver Mercedes with the chalky roof. He drove her to her white coat ceremony in it. He wore a suit he had owned since 1987, and he sat in the second row, and he did not clap when everyone else clapped, because he was crying too hard to get his hands to work. He died in the spring of her fellowship year, heart, in his sleep, in his chair, with the television on. The will was 1 page long, and one item of it concerned property. So to my granddaughter Naomi, the car. She knows why. The car. She knew why. Now, I want you to hold 2 pictures in your mind at the same time, because the whole story lives in the space between them. Picture 1, a woman in a 15-year-old sedan with a cracked windshield, driving before dawn on a county highway, alone. Picture 2. A surgeon who had, by that point in her career, personally put back together 162 children and lost 11, and remembered every single one of the 11 by name and by the color of the coat their mother was wearing in the hallway. Both pictures are the same person. The tragedy of this story, and it is a tragedy before it is anything else, is that a man looked at picture 1 and never once considered that picture 2 existed. The phone went off at 4:26 a.m. Naomi was already half awake, the way you get after 11 years of being on call. She had learned to sleep in a state that was less like sleep and more like a car idling in a driveway. The voice on the line belonged to Ruth Ann Kelly, the charge nurse in Mercy General's emergency department, a woman of 58 who had worked nights for 22 years and who did not, as a rule, waste words. "Dr. Carter, sorry, honey, we need you. Go ahead. 2 vehicle on Route 9, mile marker 44. Head on. State troopers are on scene. They're bringing us 2. Adult female 63 and a child." Naomi was already standing. She had a system. Scrubs went on the chair beside the bed, folded, every night, so that she never once in her career had to look for them in the dark. How old is the child? 8? There is a thing that happens to a certain kind of person when the word 8 enters a room at 4:26 in the morning. Everything else in the world takes one step backward and stands very quietly against the wall. Vitals? Not good. Trooper on scene says she's conscious, but she's not right. Abdomen's rigid. Ruth Ann's word, not mine, but Ruth Ann's word is usually good. Ruth Ann, you are Ruth Ann. Then Ruth Ann's word is definitely good. Doctor, how fast can you be here? Naomi looked at the clock. She lived 9.5 miles from Mercy General, out on Old Miller Road, in a small brick house she had bought with her first attending's salary and had not yet finished furnishing. 20 minutes. Get me a room. Type and cross 4 units. Call Priya. Already did all 3. Then why are we still talking? We're not, said Ruth Ann Kelly, and hung up. Naomi Carter was out the door at 4:34 a.m. She had on green scrubs, a fleece jacket over them, and running shoes. Her hospital badge was clipped to the jacket, photograph facing out, the way it always was. Her medical bag was on the passenger seat where it lived. She backed the silver Mercedes out of the driveway and turned east on Old Miller Road toward the county highway. The sky was the color of a nickel. There was frost on the fence posts. The road was empty in both directions for as far as the headlights reached. She was going to be at the hospital in 14 minutes. She was going to be at the hospital in 45. Officer Ryan Delaney was 34 years old and had 6 years on the Ridgemont Police Department. I am going to tell you some things about him now, and I want to be careful how I do it, because it would be easy, and it would be dishonest, to make him into a monster. He was not a monster. Monsters are rare. What happened on Route 9 that morning did not require a monster. It required something much more common and much more dangerous, which is a man who had stopped asking himself questions. He was divorced, 2 years. He had primary custody of his daughter. He worked overnights because overnights paid a shift differential of $2.40 an hour, and because the mortgage on a house built for a family of 3 does not shrink when the family does. He was, by the accounts of the men he worked with, decent enough. Showed up, did the reports, bought the coffee when it was his turn. And he had, somewhere along the way, acquired a habit of arithmetic. The same arithmetic Walter Carter had warned his granddaughter about, 20 years earlier, in the front seat of that same car. He was parked in the gravel turnout at the top of the grade on Route 9, a mile and a half north of the county line, running stationary radar on a road with almost nothing on it. At 4:40 a.m., a silver Mercedes-Benz came over the rise, doing 58 in a 55. At 4:41 a.m., he pulled out behind it and lit it up. Naomi saw the lights and did exactly what her grandfather taught her to do, in a lesson he had delivered when she was 15 and had repeated every year until she was 25. She signaled. She slowed gradually. She pulled onto the widest part of the shoulder she could find, well clear of the traffic lane. She put the car in park. She turned off the engine. She turned on the dome light. She rolled down her window all the way. She put both hands on the top of the steering wheel where they could be seen. She did not reach for anything. She was, understand, in a hurry that had a child's life at the end of it. And she still did every one of those things in order, because Walter Carter had made her practice them in a church parking lot on a Sunday afternoon until she could do them without thinking. Officer Delaney approached on the driver's side, flashlight up and to the right of the window, the way they teach. License, registration, insurance. Yes, sir. My license is in the console. My registration is in the glove box. I'm going to reach for them slowly with my right hand. Is that all right? There was a pause. Go ahead. She retrieved them. She handed them out the window. Her hands went back to the wheel. Delaney looked at the license. Then he looked at her. Then he looked at the car. Then he said the first thing. This your vehicle? Yes, sir. The registration's in my name. He turned the registration over, as if there were something on the back of it. There was not. This your vehicle? Naomi did not answer for a beat, not out of defiance, out of recognition. There is a particular feeling that arrives when a question is asked a second time for a reason that has nothing to do with the answer, and every person who has ever been on the receiving end of it knows the exact temperature of that feeling. Yes, sir, it is. Because I ran the plate and it comes back to a Carter. That's me, Naomi Carter. It's on the license in your hand. He shone the flashlight through the back window, slowly, along the rear seat, into the footwells. Where are you headed at 4 a.m? Mercy General. I'm a physician. I've been called in for a trauma. Now, listeners, I want you to hear what he said next, because it is the hinge on which this entire story swings. He laughed. It was not a cruel laugh. That is somehow worse. It was an easy, offhand, almost friendly laugh. The laugh of a man who thinks he has heard a joke. Everybody's a doctor. Naomi kept her voice level. She had been keeping her voice level in high-pressure rooms since she was 24 years old. It is, in its way, a professional skill. Officer, I understand. My hospital badge is clipped to my jacket, right here on my chest. My phone is in the cup holder, and the hospital has called me twice in the last 10 minutes. You can call Mercy General directly. The main line is on the badge. It will take you 30 seconds to verify, and there is an 8-year-old on Route 9 right now who does not have 30 minutes. That was the whole of it. That was the entire speech. 12 seconds, start to finish, and every word of it verifiable. Officer Delaney did not call the hospital. Instead, he asked the third question. Ma'am, step out of the vehicle for me. May I ask why? Step out of the vehicle. She stepped out of the vehicle. And here is where the body cam footage, which the whole country would eventually see, has its first significant feature. At 4:46 and 12 seconds, as Naomi Carter is stepping onto the gravel shoulder in green scrubs and a fleece jacket, Officer Ryan Delaney's right hand comes up to his chest and presses the mute button on his body-worn camera. The video keeps running. The audio stops. For 4 minutes and 11 seconds, there is no sound. We know some of what was said in those 4 minutes, because a truck driver would eventually record part of it, and because 2 other people would eventually testify. We do not know all of it, and I am not going to invent what I do not know. But we know this much, because the truck driver caught it, and because Naomi repeated it under oath, and her account and his recording matched to the word. He said, "Cars like this don't usually belong to people like you at this hour." And she said, "Sir, please, call Mercy General. There is a child on that highway who is going to die." At 4:49 a.m., Officer Delaney handcuffed Dr. Naomi Carter and seated her on the guardrail on the shoulder of Route 9. The stated reason, entered later in the report, was officer safety pending verification of vehicle ownership. Understand what that means. It means he did not arrest her. He did not charge her. He did not accuse her of anything at all. He simply decided that a 31-year-old woman in surgical scrubs standing on the side of an empty highway at 4 a.m. constituted a danger sufficient to justify metal on her wrists while he took his time. He took her phone from the cup holder. He set it face down on the roof of her car. He then searched the vehicle. He opened the glove box, the console, the door pockets. He opened the trunk. He opened her medical bag. He unzipped the inner compartment where she kept, among other things, a laminated photograph of Walter Carter in a suit from 1987, standing in the second row at a white coat ceremony with his face wet. He looked at it for perhaps a second and a half, and put it back in the wrong pocket. And while all of that was happening, the phone on the roof of the car rang, and rang, and rang. 11 times, in 23 minutes. Mercy General's main switchboard, Ruth Ann Kelly's cell, the operating room desk, Mercy General's main switchboard again. Dr. Priya Raman, the anesthesiologist, twice. The pediatric intensive care unit, Ruth Ann Kelly again, and again, and again. Face down on the roof of a car, buzzing against sheet metal, in the dark. Naomi Carter sat on a guardrail with her hands behind her back and watched a phone she could not reach light up the underside of a frost-covered morning, 11 times. And she said, in the same steady tone, roughly every 90 seconds, "Sir, please, call the hospital." She said it, by the eventual count of the recording and her own testimony, 14 times. Not once did her voice go up. I want to say something here, and I want to say it plainly, because I think it is the part of this story that people miss. There is a kind of strength that looks like fury. We are used to that kind. We know how to film it and how to talk about it. And there is another kind, which is rarer and costs more, and it looks like a woman sitting perfectly still on a guardrail, doing arithmetic of her own. If I lose my temper, this takes an hour instead of 30 minutes, and that child dies, and choosing, 14 separate times, to swallow every single thing a human being has a right to feel. Her hands were shaking. You can see it on the video. They shake for the entire 23 minutes. Her voice never does. At 5:03 in the morning, a man named Gene Holloway came over the rise northbound in a refrigerated truck, carrying 11 pallets of produce to a distribution center in Marysville. Gene was 61 years old. He had driven for the same company for 26 years. He had a bad knee, a good wife, 4 grandchildren, and a route that he could have driven with his eyes closed and sometimes worried that he had. He was, in every visible respect, an ordinary older American man on his way to work. He saw the flashing lights, he saw a police cruiser and a silver sedan, and he saw a woman in green scrubs sitting on a guardrail with her hands behind her back. Gene Holloway told the review board later, in a plain, flat voice, exactly what went through his mind. I thought, well, that's a nurse. And then I thought, why is that nurse in handcuffs? And then I thought, and I'm not proud of how long this took me, I thought, if that was my daughter sitting on that rail, I'd want somebody to stop. So he stopped. He pulled the truck onto the shoulder about 80 feet back. He put on his four-ways. He got out, slowly, hands visible. A 61-year-old man in a work jacket who understood perfectly well how to approach a traffic stop, and he stood beside his own front bumper, and he did not come closer. And he took out his phone, and he started recording. 6 minutes and 40 seconds. That is how long Gene Holloway's video runs. It is shaky, and the audio is windblown, and half of it is lit by the strobe of a light bar. It is, by any measure, one of the most consequential 6 minutes of video ever recorded in the state of Ohio. On it, you can hear Officer Delaney say, in response to something Naomi has said off mic, "Ma'am, I'm not going to tell you again." And you can hear Naomi Carter say, in that same level, unhurried, almost gentle voice, "Sir, please, call Mercy General. There is a child on that highway who is going to die." And then, and this is the moment that would eventually be clipped and shared 40 million times in 48 hours, you hear Gene Holloway's voice, from 80 feet back, cracking a little, the voice of a man who has just decided to do something he was not raised to do. "Officer? Officer, I've got a phone, and I'm calling that hospital myself." At 5:07 a.m., Officer Ryan Delaney's shoulder radio came alive. The dispatcher's name was Angie Pruitt. She had worked Ridgemont's overnight dispatch console for 9 years. She had a voice like a woman reading a grocery list, which is exactly the voice you want in that chair, because the day a dispatcher's voice changes is a day nobody forgets. Her voice changed. "Ridgemont, 314. 314, go." There was a pause on the channel. 2 full seconds of nothing, which on a police radio is an eternity. Ryan, not the unit number, his name. Ryan. The state has a positive ID on the vehicle from the Route 9 crash. Registered owner is Ellen Delaney, 63, of Ridgemont. His mother. There's a second occupant. Juvenile female, 8 years old. Megan. Now let me back up, because you deserve to know how a grandmother and an 8-year-old came to be on a highway at 4 in the morning. And because this story only works if every piece of it is true to how life actually goes. Ellen Delaney had taken her granddaughter down to Bowling Green, Kentucky, for a week to visit Ellen's sister Maureen, who was 70 and not doing well, and had not met Megan since the child was 3. Megan started 3rd grade on the Monday, so they had to be back Sunday. Ellen Delaney was a woman of a certain generation and a certain thrift. A hotel room on the way home was $59 she did not intend to spend, and besides, she had been driving the interstate since 1979, and she was not afraid of the dark. So she did what thousands of grandmothers have done. She let the child sleep in the back seat with a pillow and her blanket, and she left Bowling Green at 11 at night, and she drank a large coffee in Cincinnati, and she pointed the car north. She had told her son they would be home, sometime Sunday morning. She had not told him she was driving overnight. She had not told him because she knew he would tell her not to, and she had made a private, small, entirely human decision to surprise him with breakfast instead. At 4:12 a.m., at mile marker 44 on Route 9, a pickup truck driven by a 26-year-old man who had been awake for 29 hours crossed the center line. That is how it happens. It is almost never dramatic. It is a tired man and a thrifty grandmother and a sleeping child, and 11 seconds. On the shoulder of Route 9, 1.5 miles north of the county line, Officer Ryan Delaney stood completely still for 4 seconds with his hand on his radio. Gene Holloway's video catches all 4 of them. You can watch a man's face come apart in real time. There is no other way to describe it. It is not a performance. He does not shout. His mouth opens slightly, and his eyes go somewhere very far away, and his hand comes off the radio and hangs in the air, and then his knees do a thing that knees do. And then he turned around. And he looked at the woman in green scrubs sitting handcuffed on his guardrail. The woman who had told him, 14 times, in the same steady voice, that there was a child on that highway who was going to die. And Gene Holloway's phone catches 4 words, so quiet the microphone barely holds them. Oh God, oh God. He could not get the handcuffs off. I do not say that for drama. I say it because it is what happened, and because it is the detail that Gene Holloway, a man not given to poetry, could not stop talking about afterward. Delaney's hands were shaking so badly that he dropped the key twice in the gravel. On the second time, Naomi Carter, still cuffed, still seated, still calm, said, "Officer, breathe out, then put the key in." She talked him through it. The woman in the handcuffs talked the man with the key through unlocking the handcuffs. At 5:12 a.m., the cuffs came off. The traffic stop had lasted 31 minutes. Naomi Carter stood up. She rolled each wrist once. She walked to her car. She took her phone off the roof. Delaney was saying something. He was saying a great many things, all of them at once, and none of them in order. "I didn't know, ma'am. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Please. That's my daughter. That's my little girl. Please." And he had his hand out. Not toward her exactly, out toward the space between them. She did not take it. She did not look at it. She held up one finger. One. The universal gesture of a person who needs 3 seconds of silence. And she dialed. "Ruth Ann, it's Carter. I'm 16 minutes out. I was detained on a traffic stop. I'll explain later." A pause. "Say that again." Another pause. Longer. "All right, listen to me. Get her to CT if you have time. And if you do not have time, do not wait for me. Get her into room 3, and open her. Priya is capable of the induction without me. Tell her B negative, all 4 units, and call the blood bank in Delaware County for 4 more. We are going to need them." A pause. "Ruth Ann, 16 minutes. She hung up. She opened her car door. And then, and this is the part I want you to sit with, Naomi Carter turned back and looked at Ryan Delaney for the first time since the radio call, and she said one sentence to him. "Do not follow me. You'll drive into a tree, and then I'll have 2 of you." Then she got in the car and drove to the hospital. Gene Holloway stayed. He stayed for 40 minutes. He called his dispatcher and told them he was going to be late and did not explain why. He walked up to a police officer he had just filmed doing something indefensible, a man now sitting on the same guardrail where the woman had been sitting, and he put his hand on that man's shoulder. I have thought about that a great deal. Gene Holloway did not approve of what he had seen. He would say so, later, under oath, in language a good deal plainer than mine. He did not take back the video. He did not delete a second of it. He just also would not leave a man alone on a highway at 5 in the morning, on the worst day of that man's life. That is not a contradiction. That is, I would argue, the entire moral architecture of this story in one gesture. You can hold a man accountable and hold him up at the same time. Our grandparents knew that. We have gotten worse at it. At 5:26 a.m., a Ridgemont sergeant named Ray Mendoza, 27 years on the department, 4 years from his pension, arrived on scene, took one look, took Delaney's keys, took Delaney's weapon, and drove him to Mercy General himself. Sergeant Mendoza would testify later that Ryan Delaney said nothing at all during that drive, except one sentence, repeated, in a voice Mendoza described as belonging to a person he did not recognize. She told me 14 times. Naomi Carter came through the ambulance bay doors of Mercy General Hospital at 5:24 a.m., moving at the specific pace of a surgeon who has learned that running frightens families and costs you 11 seconds of composure you will need later. Ruth Ann Kelly met her in the corridor and walked backward in front of her, talking fast. Pressure's 88/50 and falling. Heart rate 140. Belly's rigid. She's been in and out. Priya's got the room open. The grandmother? Ruth Ann Kelly's face did a thing. Upstairs. She's critical. Dr. Okafor's got her. Understood. Naomi did not break stride. Blood? 4 units hanging. Delaware County's sending 6 more. They're 22 minutes out. Then we're going to be efficient. She scrubbed in. 55 seconds at the sink, which is not a corner cut. It is simply what 55 seconds looks like when you have done it 11,000 times. And at 5:41 in the morning, Dr. Naomi Carter walked into operating room 3 at Mercy General Hospital and went to work on an 8-year-old girl named Megan Delaney. I am not going to walk you through the surgery. That is not the kind of story this is, and there is no version of that description that makes you a better person for having heard it. I will tell you 3 things about it. The first is that it took 6 hours and 11 minutes. The second is that at the 90-minute mark, Dr. Priya Raman, the anesthesiologist, a woman who had worked with Naomi for 4 years, quietly asked one question over the drape. Naomi, are you all right to keep going? Because Priya Raman had heard, by then, from Ruth Ann Kelly, who had heard from Sergeant Ray Mendoza in the waiting room, exactly whose child was on that table and exactly what had happened on Route 9. And Naomi Carter answered without looking up. Priya, there is one person in this building who is not entitled to have feelings about that right now, and she is standing where I'm standing. Suction. The third thing I will tell you is this. At 11:52 a.m., Naomi Carter stepped back from the table, and she said the 2 words that everyone in that room had been waiting 6 hours to hear. She's ours. That is the phrase they use, at Mercy General, when a child who was not going to make it is going to make it. Nobody remembers who started it. Every surgeon there says it. She's ours. Here is the part that matters about the 31 minutes, and I want to be exact about it, because exactness is a form of respect. The 31 minutes did not cost Megan Delaney her life. Nobody in this story gets to say that, and Naomi Carter refused to say it, then or ever. But it cost. Because of the delay, the surgical team had to take a more aggressive approach than they would have taken at 5 a.m. Choices that would have been reversible at hour 1 were not reversible at hour 2. Megan Delaney lost her spleen, an organ she would have kept if that car had not been stopped, and she will take a daily precaution and a course of vaccinations for the rest of her life because of it. She spent 9 days in the pediatric intensive care unit, instead of the 3 or 4 she would likely have needed. And Ellen Delaney, 63 years old, of Ridgemont, Ohio, who had driven the interstate since 1979 and was not afraid of the dark, and who had wanted to surprise her son with breakfast, Died at 8:40 that morning, 2 floors up, without regaining consciousness. Her injuries were not survivable at 4:12 a.m., and they were not survivable at 5 a.m. No delay caused that. Dr. Okafor was clear about it, and Naomi was clearer. But it is true, and it will always be true, that Ryan Delaney was on the shoulder of Route 9, asking a woman for the 3rd time whether the car she was driving belonged to her, at the same hour that his mother was dying 11 miles away, and that he was not there. He was not there because he was busy. At 11:58 a.m., Naomi Carter came out through the double doors of the surgical wing into the family waiting area on the 3rd floor. She had been awake for 31 hours. She had a mask line across her face. Her scrub cap was soaked through at the band. Ryan Delaney was standing at the far end of the hall. He had been standing there for 6 hours. Sergeant Mendoza had brought him a chair at hour 2, and he had not sat in it. He was in uniform, minus his belt and his weapon and his badge, which Mendoza had taken on the shoulder of Route 9 and locked in the trunk of a cruiser. So he was, in a very literal sense, a man in a blue shirt. Someone had told him about his mother at 8:52. He had received that news standing in the same spot. When the doors opened, he turned. And then, in front of Ruth Ann Kelly and Sergeant Ray Mendoza and a hospital chaplain named Father Emil Kovac, and 4 strangers in a waiting room, Officer Ryan Delaney went down onto his knees on a linoleum floor. He did not say anything at first. He could not. Naomi Carter crossed that hallway. Now, I have told a great many stories in my time, and I have learned that the true measure of a person is almost never taken in the moment they are wronged. It is taken in the moment they are handed the power to do the wronging back. She had it. Understand that clearly. In that hallway, at that hour, in front of witnesses, with the video already on the internet, and her own wrists still marked, Naomi Carter held complete power over a man who had put her on a guardrail. She could have walked past him. Not one person alive would have judged her. Instead, she stopped in front of him, and she bent down, and she took him by the upper arm, and she pulled. "Get up," she said. "Not to me. Don't you do that to me." He got up. And then she told him about his daughter, in the order and in the language that surgeons use, because that is a kindness and most people do not know it. Megan came through the operation. She is stable. She's on a ventilator tonight, and that's expected, not a bad sign. We removed her spleen. There will be some things she has to be careful about for the rest of her life, and I will explain all of them to you tomorrow, when you can hear them. Tonight, the only sentence you need is this one. She is going to grow up. He made a sound. I am not going to try to write it. And Ruth Ann Kelly, who had been standing there 22 years worth of moments like this one, took 2 steps forward and got a hand under his elbow, because that is what she does. And then Ryan Delaney said the thing he had been building toward for 6 hours. "Ma'am, I need you to know. I would understand if I don't have any right to. I just need you to know that I know what I did, and that I'm going to say it out loud to anybody who asks me, and that I am sorry, and that I know sorry is not a currency that buys anything." And Naomi Carter said the sentence. The one that ended up on 100 million screens, the one that got printed on church bulletins in 9 states and read aloud at 2 graduations and taped to the inside of a locker door at a police academy in Missouri. She said, "I didn't save your daughter for you. I saved her because that is the work, and I would have done it for anybody, including the man who put me in handcuffs. That's not mercy, officer. That's just my job. The difference between us this morning is that I did mine." And then she went home and slept for 14 hours. Gene Holloway did not post his video. I want that on the record, because a great many people assumed otherwise. Gene Holloway was 61 years old and had a flip phone mentality and a smartphone body, and would not have known how to post a video if you had paid him. What Gene Holloway did was drive to the Ridgemont Police Department at 2 o'clock that afternoon in a refrigerated truck full of produce that was now 9 hours late, and walk into the lobby and ask the woman at the desk how a person files a complaint. He filed it. He gave them the video. He signed a statement. He was there for 2 hours and 11 minutes. And then, because he was a thorough man, and because his wife Deanna told him to, he emailed the video to his nephew, who was a paralegal in Columbus, just in case it disappears. It did not disappear, but the nephew put it somewhere it could not. By Tuesday morning it had 600,000 views. By Wednesday afternoon it had 11 million. By Friday, it had passed 40 million across 4 platforms, and the 31 minutes had become a phrase that people used without needing to explain it. Here is what I find remarkable, and what I think explains why this one traveled when so many others do not. The video does not contain a single thing that is exciting. There is no shouting. There is no struggle. There is nothing that could be described as an incident. There is a woman sitting on a guardrail in surgical scrubs with her hands behind her back, saying the same sentence in the same voice, while a phone on the roof of a car lights up over and over again in the dark. That is all it is. 6 minutes and 40 seconds of a woman being quiet and reasonable while something unreasonable happens to her. And it turns out, that is the most devastating thing you can put in front of the American public. Not rage, patience. Patience is what breaks people's hearts, because every single one of us knows exactly how much it costs, and every single one of us knows we would have spent less. I received, well, let me put it this way. Of all the letters this story generated, the ones that came in heaviest were from people over 60, and they said, over and over, in 100 different hands, a version of the same thing. My mother taught me to be still like that. I did not understand why until I watched that video. The Ridgemont Police Department opened an internal investigation on Monday, the day after the stop. Chief Harold Vance, who had been chief for 11 years and had 4 years left in him, ordered it himself before the video had 100,000 views, and I will give him credit for that, because a great many chiefs would have waited to see how bad it was going to get. Ryan Delaney was placed on unpaid administrative leave. He did not contest it. He did not call the union. His representative had to be assigned to him, because he would not request one. Now, I am going to explain how a police officer actually loses a job in the United States of America, because most people do not know, and because the truth of it is far more interesting than the version people imagine. An officer being rude does not cost him his job. An officer making a bad stop does not, by itself, cost him his job. It costs him a reprimand and some retraining and a note in a file. An officer holding a person for 31 minutes on an unfounded suspicion is serious. It is a civil rights exposure, and it will cost the city money. But by itself, on a first offense, with 6 clean years behind it, that is a suspension, a demotion, a very bad year, and a career that limps on. Here is what ends it. The report. At 8:20 in the morning on the day of the stop, after the radio call, after the handcuffs came off, after Sergeant Mendoza had driven him to the hospital, but before anyone knew a truck driver had a video, Officer Ryan Delaney sat in a Mercy General waiting room with a department tablet on his knees and completed his incident narrative for the traffic stop, because that is procedure, and because there is a part of a man's brain that keeps doing procedure while the rest of him is on fire. And in that narrative, he wrote 3 things. He wrote that the operator was uncooperative and refused multiple lawful commands. He wrote that the operator provided inconsistent statements regarding vehicle ownership. He wrote that his body-worn camera audio had malfunctioned intermittently during the contact. All 3 were false. The first 2 were contradicted, word for word, by his own camera's video and by Gene Holloway's audio. Naomi Carter complied with every instruction within seconds of being given it, and she never once gave an inconsistent statement about anything. But it was the third one that finished him. Because a body-worn camera does not simply record video, it records a device log. And that device log recorded, to the second, that at 4:46:12 a.m., the audio on Unit 3-14's camera was disabled by a manual button press at the device, and that at 4:50:23 a.m., it was manually re-enabled by a second button press. Not a malfunction, 2 presses, 4 minutes and 11 seconds apart. The department's technical review took 11 minutes to establish this. 11 minutes. And with that, this was no longer a case about a bad traffic stop. It was a case about a sworn officer filing a false official report to conceal his own conduct. That is the line. That is the actual, real, career-ending line in American policing, and it has almost nothing to do with public outrage. Because of a 1963 Supreme Court case called Brady v. Maryland, a prosecutor has a constitutional obligation to disclose to the defense any evidence that could undermine the credibility of a government witness. And a police officer who has been formally found to have falsified an official report is, from that day forward, an officer whose credibility must be disclosed in every single case he touches. They call it the Brady List. Once an officer's name is on it, his testimony becomes a liability in every prosecution he is part of. Every defense attorney in the county receives, by law, a notice that this officer has been found untruthful. No prosecutor's office wants to build a case on him. No department wants to hire him, because they cannot use him. An officer on the Brady List is not fired for being unpopular. He is finished because he has become professionally unusable. The disciplinary hearing was held on a Thursday in the council chambers of Ridgemont City Hall because the police department's conference room seated 18 and there were 240 people who wanted in. It was open to the public. Chief Vance insisted on that, over the advice of 2 attorneys. I want to walk you through who spoke, because the shape of that room tells you something hopeful about this country that gets lost in the noise. Gene Holloway spoke first. He wore a sport coat he had bought for his son's wedding in 1994, and he read from 3 index cards. He said he had voted in every election since 1983, and had never once in his life spoken against a police officer, and that he was not speaking against police officers now. He said he was speaking about one morning and one man. He said, and I am quoting him because I could not improve it, I have been pulled over 11 times in 43 years of driving, and not once did anybody ask me twice whose truck it was. Sergeant Ray Mendoza spoke second. 27 years, 4 from his pension. Every man in that room knew what it cost him to stand up. He said he had trained Ryan Delaney as a rookie. He said Delaney had been a good rookie. He said that made it worse, not better. And then he said the thing that got printed in the Columbus paper. There are people who will tell you that testifying against him makes me a traitor to the badge. I have carried this badge for 27 years, and I am telling you the opposite is true. A man who writes a false report doesn't just hurt the person he wrote it about. He spends every honest report the rest of us ever filed. He spends my word. He spends the word of every officer in this room, in every courtroom in this county, for the rest of our careers. I did not spend 27 years earning that so he could spend it in one paragraph at 8:20 in the morning. They ran that quote for 4 days. Dr. Naomi Carter spoke third. The room had been waiting for her. The cameras had been waiting for her. There had been, by that Thursday, 17 separate national interview requests, 4 book offers, and a message from a lawyer in Cleveland who had used the phrase 8 figures in the second sentence. She had answered none of them. She had, in the 11 days since the stop, made exactly one public statement, which was 4 sentences long and was released through the hospital, and which said that she was grateful for the public's concern, that she would not be discussing the matter until the process was complete, and that Megan Delaney was recovering well. She walked to the front of that council chamber in a gray blazer with her hospital badge still clipped to it, because she had come from a shift. She spoke for 6 minutes. She did not describe her feelings. She described the timeline, times, to the minute, actions in order. She had written it out the way she would write an operative note, and she read it in the same voice she had used on the guardrail. And then she put the paper down and said this: I have been asked, more times than I can count in the last 11 days, whether I want this man's career. I have thought carefully about it, because I am aware that a great many people are waiting to be told what I want. So here is my answer. I do not want his career. I want his report. He can be a bad officer and be retrained. He can be a rude man and be corrected. What he cannot be, and remain in that uniform, is a man who wrote down that I was uncooperative when I was not, and that his camera malfunctioned when he had pressed a button with his own thumb. Because if that stands, then every person after me who says this is what happened to me is a liar until proven otherwise, and every report he ever writes is worth exactly nothing, and every officer in this room who has never written a false word in his life gets to carry that for him. I am not asking this board for punishment. I am asking it for arithmetic. He wrote a number down wrong. Correct it. That is all I came to say. Thank you for your time. I'm on at 7. And she picked up her bag and she went back to work. Ryan Delaney spoke last. He had a right to a representative. and he had declined one for the third time. He stood at the small podium in a gray suit that did not fit him anymore, because he had lost 19 pounds in 11 days. He read no notes. He said, in substance, this: that everything in Dr. Carter's timeline was accurate, that he had asked her 3 times whether the car was hers, and that there had been no lawful reason to ask her even once, that he had muted his own camera, and that he had known exactly what he was doing when he did it, that he had filed a report containing 3 false statements, and that he had filed it knowingly, and that he wished to state clearly for the record that no one had pressured him, that he had not been confused, and that he was not going to stand at that podium and blame his grief for something he had done before he had anything to grieve. And then he said, "My daughter is alive because a woman I put in handcuffs got to a hospital in time, not because of anything I did, in spite of everything I did. I've been asked what I think a fair outcome is. I don't think I'm entitled to an opinion on that, but I'll say this much, because my mother raised me to finish what I start. I don't want anybody in this town saying they took my job because of the video, or because of the internet, or because of what happened to my family. Nobody took my job. I wrote 3 sentences that weren't true and I signed my name under them. That's the whole story. That's all any of it is. I'd ask that the board not go easy on me. I've got a daughter who's going to read the transcript of this someday. I'd rather she read that her father took it standing up." He sat down. The room did not applaud. It was not that kind of room, and it was not that kind of speech. Ruth Ann Kelly said afterward that what she remembered was that nobody moved for about 8 seconds. The board deliberated for 2 hours and 40 minutes. On the traffic stop, sustained. Detention without reasonable suspicion. On the search of the vehicle, sustained. Search without consent, warrant, or probable cause. On the handcuffing, sustained. Use of restraints without lawful basis. On the deactivation of the body-worn camera, sustained. Intentional interference with a recording device during a citizen contact. On the incident report, sustained. Untruthfulness in an official department document. Termination, effective immediately. The Ohio Peace Officer Training Commission opened its own file 2 days later, and 11 months after that, Ryan Delaney's peace officer certification was permanently revoked. In plain English, it is not that no department will hire him. It is that no department in the state of Ohio is legally permitted to. The county prosecutor's office placed his name on its Brady disclosure list, where it will remain permanently. The city of Ridgemont settled Naomi Carter's civil claim 8 months later. The figure was not disclosed at the plaintiff's insistence. What she did with it was disclosed, because the hospital announced it. She endowed a fund at Mercy General Hospital that pays the out-of-pocket medical costs of pediatric trauma patients in Marion, Delaware, and Ridgemont counties, whose families fall under a certain income threshold. As of the last accounting I saw, it had covered 411 children. It is called the Walter Carter Fund. Because he bought a car for a woman who had never ridden in a nice one, and because he taught a 15-year-old girl how to sit still in a church parking lot, and because he told her, over and over, that some people would do arithmetic in their heads and get it wrong, and that she did not owe anybody an explanation for a thing she came by honest. I have never liked stories that end at the verdict. Life does not end at the verdict. Life is what people do on Tuesday, 4 years later, when nobody is filming. So let me tell you what happened to everybody. Gene Holloway drove for 2 more years, and then retired with a knee that finally gave out on him. He and Deanna moved to a house 40 minutes outside Ridgemont with a garden that got out of hand. He gave one interview to the Ridgemont paper and turned down everything else, including a national morning program that offered to fly him to New York. He told the local reporter he did not want to be famous for 6 minutes of standing on a shoulder. Anybody would have stopped, he said. That is not true. That is the whole point. 9 vehicles passed that scene between 4:41 and 5:03 in the morning. 9. Every one of them saw the same thing Gene Holloway saw. Gene Holloway was the 10th. Sergeant Ray Mendoza took some weight for a while, the kind you cannot file a grievance about. A chair pulled out a little slower at the table. A couple of guys who found somewhere else to be. It lasted about 7 months. Then it stopped, because that is generally what happens when a decent man just keeps showing up and doing the work, and does not complain about it, and because a couple of the younger officers made a point of sitting with him. He made lieutenant the following year and retired at 30 years with a pension and a plaque and a room full of people who meant it. He teaches a 4-hour block at the regional academy now on report writing. He opens it the same way every time. He plays 6 minutes and 40 seconds of a video, and then he says, "The stop is not what ended his career." Turn to page 1 of your handout. Chief Harold Vance put the department's entire patrol division through a revised policy on discretionary stops and on the body-worn camera system. He made 2 changes that outlived him. The first was that the camera's audio mute function was disabled at the administrative level on every unit in the department, so that no officer could press it at all. The second was a rule that any officer who runs a registration check that comes back clean and then asks a driver a second time whether the vehicle is theirs must state a specific articulable reason in the report. It is a small rule. It sounds like nothing. 4 other departments in the region adopted it within 2 years. That is usually how change actually happens in this country. Not with a march, with a paragraph. Ryan Delaney did not leave Ridgemont, which surprised everybody. He had a daughter in the school district, and a mortgage he could not get out from under, and a mother to bury, and he had, by his own choice, made himself the most recognizable man in a town of 19,000 people. He worked at a warehouse on Foundry Street, 4 buildings down from where Walter Carter had run a lathe for 41 years, which is the kind of thing life does when it is being obvious. He went to Ellen Delaney's funeral 11 days after the stop, on the Wednesday before the hearing. 40 people came. Ruth Ann Kelly was one of them. And he did one other thing, every year on the anniversary. He wrote a letter to Naomi Carter, not asking for anything, not asking for forgiveness. He had been very clear at that podium that he did not consider forgiveness a thing he was entitled to request. Just an accounting, 1 page, once a year. Megan is in 5th grade. She's tall. She had a rough winter, but she's fine. I'm still at the warehouse. I still say it out loud when anybody asks me. I thought you should know she's all right. Naomi Carter never wrote back. I do not say that as a criticism. She did not owe him a letter. She did not owe him a syllable. She had already given that family 6 hours and 11 minutes of the best work anybody in that county could do, and she had given it while her wrists were still marked. She read them, though. She kept every one. Megan Delaney grew up. She takes a daily precaution because she does not have a spleen, and she gets her vaccinations on a schedule, and she has a scar she is not remotely self-conscious about. She played volleyball. She was, by all accounts, a normal kid in a town that knew her name for reasons that had nothing to do with her. She was told the story when she was 13. Her father told her himself, all of it, at the kitchen table, and he did not soften a single part of his own conduct. And Ruth Ann Kelly, who by then had become a fixture in that house in a way nobody planned, was there because he had asked her to be. Megan Delaney did not speak for a long time, and then she asked one question. Does she know I know? Here is the last scene, and then I will let you go. 4 years after the stop, Mercy General Hospital opened a rebuilt pediatric wing, and there was a small ceremony in the courtyard on a Saturday in June. Folding chairs, a plywood podium, a table with a sheet cake on it. Naomi Carter was there because she had to be. She was 35 by then, and had been named division chief the previous fall, and she disliked ceremonies roughly as much as it is possible for one person to dislike a thing. Ryan Delaney was there because his daughter had asked him to bring her. He had not planned on it. He had, in fact, argued about it in the car for most of the drive, and lost, the way fathers of 12-year-olds lose. They stood at the back. He did not approach. He had never once approached, in 4 years, in a town of 19,000 people, which, if you think about it, takes a certain amount of deliberate effort. And at some point during the reception, a 12-year-old girl in a yellow dress separated from her father and walked across a courtyard by herself. She stopped in front of the division chief of pediatric surgery at Mercy General Hospital, and she put out her hand, and she said, "Dr. Carter? I'm Megan. You operated on me." And Naomi Carter, who had put back together, by that point in her career, more than 300 children, and had lost 19, and remembered every one of the 19 by name and by the color of the coat their mother was wearing in the hallway, looked at that girl for a long moment. And then she shook the hand. "I know exactly who you are," she said. "You were 8, and you were a mess, and you had a blanket with a horse on it that we could not get out of your hands, so we let you keep it. It went into the operating room with you. It is against every rule we have." Megan Delaney's face did something. "I still have it." "Well," said Naomi Carter. "Good, it's earned." They talked for maybe 4 minutes. About volleyball. About what a spleen does and why she could get along without one. About whether being a doctor was hard, and whether it was worth it. And Naomi answering yes and yes. And then Megan went back across the courtyard to her father. And Ryan Delaney, 42 years old now, in a warehouse polo shirt, watched his daughter walk toward him and asked the only question he could get out. "What did you talk to her about?" And Megan Delaney said, "She remembered my blanket, Dad." He did not answer for a while. And across the courtyard, Naomi Carter was already turning away, back to a conversation about ventilator budgets, because there were 411 children on a fund named for a machinist, and there was work to do. But she looked up, once, and Ryan Delaney raised his hand, not a wave exactly, just a hand, lifted, held there, and she nodded. That is all, one nod, across a courtyard, 4 years later. It was not forgiveness. She never offered him that, and he never asked. It was something smaller and, I think, harder, and I am not sure we have a good word for it in English. It was acknowledgement. It was one person telling another, "I know what you did. I know what it cost, and I am not carrying it for you. I have told you this story the long way, because I think it deserves the long way. But if you take one thing out of it, I would like it to be this." Everybody who hears this story thinks the turning point is the radio call, the moment the man finds out it is his own daughter on that highway. That is the part people share. That is the part that gets the reaction. I do not think that is the turning point. I think the turning point happened 23 minutes earlier, on a guardrail, when a woman with metal on her wrists and a phone ringing on a car roof she could not reach, made a decision that nobody was filming yet. She decided that the child was more important than her own dignity. She was wrong to have to make that decision. She should never have been asked to make it. Let nobody hear me say otherwise. But she made it 14 times in 23 minutes, in the same steady voice, with her hands shaking the whole way through. And that is why an 8-year-old girl is a grown woman today. Not because a man found out whose daughter it was. Because a woman kept asking, in a voice that never rose, for somebody to make one phone call. There is an old idea in this country, older than any of us, older than the road that story happened on, that character is not what you do when you are being watched. It is what you do in the 31 minutes before anybody shows up. Gene Holloway had 31 minutes and used 6 of them to stop his truck. Ray Mendoza had 27 years and used 4 of them to stand up. Ryan Delaney had 4 minutes and 11 seconds with his thumb on a button, and he made the wrong choice, and he spent the rest of his life saying so out loud to anybody who asked. And Naomi Carter had 31 minutes on a guardrail on the shoulder of Route 9, in the cold, before dawn, with nobody watching. She used all 31 of them to save somebody else's child. That is the story. Thank you for listening to it.